One of my most requested videos I've gotten in my comments is about PUBG video settings, but if I'm honest, my video settings aren't really something I've given any thought to until I decided to make this. So in this video, we'll be going over a range of topics like resolutions, window settings, the Nvidia control panel, and even pro PUBG players graphics settings so you can find out what settings work best for you. But first, a quick couple bullet points right up front. Number one, your video settings are 100% dependent on your computer's hardware. Someone using an RTX 5090 will have an easier time achieving higher visual quality and frame rate than someone using a gaming laptop with a 1050 Ti. Know your hardware and just try to be realistic. 2. Resolutions and aspect ratios are purely preference. There are countless debates about what is the best resolution out there, but at the end of the day, what looks like shit to some is more tolerable to others. And number 3, I am no PC optimization expert, so while I'm making this guide to help, I am only going to be talking about topics that I feel fairly confident on speaking on based off my own research and experience. While in-game overlays are convenient, if you're truly trying to make PUBG run as smoothly as possible, you'll want to disable any in-game overlays like Steam, Discord, or even the Xbox GameBar, as these are quietly using your PC's resources in the background, and while the impact may be minimal, it can lower your frames per second in most cases. To turn off the Discord overlay, open up your settings, and down at the bottom it will say Game Overlay. Click that, and then uncheck the Enable Overlay option. To disable the Steam overlay, in the top left corner, click on Steam, then Settings, then go down to In-Game, then uncheck the overlay option. Windows GameBar is an overlay that is always running in the background. In previous versions of Windows, there was a simple option you could just go in and uncheck that. Now it's not so easy. So if you really want to turn off Windows GameBar, we have to use PowerShell. To do that, we're going to click the Windows key on our keyboard and just simply type in PowerShell and then enter in this command to remove Windows GameBar completely. I've left that command down in the description of this video so that way you can just copy and paste it directly in there. If you would like to reinstall GameBar, I'm not sure why you would, but I've also included instructions in the description of this video as well, just in case. Now onto the Nvidia control panel. Apologies if you have an AMD graphics card, this step will not help you that much, but if you have an AMD GPU and you know what the equivalent of these settings are, please let me know in the comments and I'll actually pin your message for you for all of our AMD GPU users out there. All right, so we're going to go to the Manage 3D Settings section of the Nvidia control panel, and while this is my preference, I've actually just started leaving my global settings here just to default, and then change my settings per game. Taking this route slightly saves on power consumption and also from letting my GPU go crazy on maybe less demanding games that I play. If you'd like to do the same, go to the Program Settings tab, then select PUBG from the dropdown. If you don't see PUBG, then you can click the Add button and it should be listed there. Starting with Power Management mode, for PUBG this should be set to Prefer Maximum Performance. So your GPU is getting stable, sufficient power, and it'll help prevent any potential stutters. For preferred refresh rate, I typically leave this to Application Controlled to avoid any conflicting settings I may have in PUBG, since this setting will override any adjustments made in-game. Texture filtering. Again, like with any competitive shooter, if you want to prioritize frame rate over image quality, you'll want to set this to High Performance. Vertical sync, or known as V-Sync, is meant to reduce screen tearing. This should be turned off as it's known to cause input delay at the cost of smoother frames. Over the years, I've been tinkering with the other settings in the control panel across various PCs I've used, and in my experience, there is no secret sauce in these options that is going to dramatically improve PUBG's frames or image quality. The game's 8 years old, man. And it runs like shit, so nothing in here is going to fix that. There are two types of resolutions players typically use in PUBG: native or stretched. Native meaning your monitor's standard resolution, which is typically a 16:9 aspect ratio. Then there is stretch resolution, which is a lower resolution with less vertical pixels, stretched to fit the entire width of your monitor, making everything in-game slightly wider because it's stretched. Stretch res is typically a 16:10 aspect ratio. Some of the benefits of a native resolution are a clearer, more high-resolution image, Player models at a distance have more defined outlines and shading, which means they can typically be easier to see under native resolution. The benefits of using a stretch resolution, slightly wider character models, and I mean barely wider. You get this placebo effect of stretch res making it feel like there's less vertical recoil, and that's due to there being less vertical pixels on your screen, despite the recoil actually being the exact same either way. So I just want to reiterate that using stretch res does not make recoil easier. It just gives you the perception that it looks like it's less recoil. That is it. And because it is a lower resolution, you're going to be getting a little bit more frame rate at the expense of slightly worse visuals. To create a stretch resolution, you're going to open up your Nvidia control panel, go to the Change Resolution section, select your main gaming monitor, then you're going to click on the Customize button. Then you're going to want to click on Create Custom Resolution. Then you're going to type in 1728 under the horizontal pixels, and then you're going to type in 1080 under vertical lines. You're going to leave all other settings as they are, and then you're going to click Test, and then it will give the option if you want to save the resolution once the test is complete. To add a stretch resolution for a 1440p monitor, you're going to do the same process, except this time it's going to be 2304 in the horizontal pixel section, then 1440 under the vertical lines section. Now that we've created our custom resolutions, they should now be selectable inside of PUBG. At the end of the day, while it may seem like stretch res has a slight edge over native, any would-be gains you receive are so minimal that it's really going to boil down to preference, which is why you see pros really kind of split where half use native and the other half use stretched. I've been playing with stretch res for about over 2 years now, so I've just gotten used to it at this point, and even though my sprays feel the same using native as well, if anything, I mainly use it just to get a little bit more frame rate. Also, under the Adjust Desktop Size and Position tab, you want to make sure you avoid using the aspect ratio scaling option. Otherwise, your GPU will try to preserve those aspect ratios and you'll never be able to achieve stretch res. You'll just get these black bars on the side of your screen. So you want to make sure you're always using the full screen scaling option. So this was a pretty fun experiment. I took the resolution and in-game video settings of 5 different pro players and tested them so you guys can determine what looks best. I pulled these settings from specs.gg, which I'll link down below. Granted, some of these may be slightly older and have more than likely been changed, but the purpose here is to give you a general idea of what are the only settings that PUBG pros are actually changing. If anything, this was an eye-opener for me, just showing me what people will actually tolerate to get a competitive edge, because good lord, some of these looked flat out awful, respectfully. Left from Petrichor Road had probably the most tolerable graphic settings using 1728 by 1080 stretch res and a 95 FOV. He sets anti-aliasing on high and textures on ultra, which seems to be a little overkill, especially because he pairs that with sharpen enabled, but this gives the character models and textures a very defined look. Even the gun model looks clean and less pixelated compared to the other pro player settings we'll be looking at. While I do find it odd, he does have his digital vibrance set to 100%, which gives everything on screen kind of a very super saturated look. Next, we have Batulins from Twisted Minds, and he is using a native resolution at 1920 by 1080 with a 95 FOV, setting nearly everything to very low aside from textures, and he even has sharpen turned off. Edges tend to draw in a little more jagged, with the character model having a slight increase in pixelization. Up next, we have the in-game graphics settings from the Falcons player Shrimzy. Shrimzy is using a native 1920 by 1080 resolution and using a 90 FOV, putting everything on very low except for textures, which he has set to medium with sharpen enabled. For me, I think medium is the best balance for textures, especially with sharpen enabled. It makes it look a lot more crisp. Next, we have Salute from Genji Esports, who I have to say is an absolute madman. He is using a stretch res of 1728 by 1080 and a 90 FOV, and he has everything turned to very low, with sharpen disabled too, and even his brightness is set to 50. This to me was the worst settings that I've seen so far. Textures are super low poly and shine because of the low anti-aliasing. The gun model even looks smooth in a bad way, and with the brightness turned all the way down to 50, it makes everything on screen look super muddy and gross. I mean that with no disrespect, but good lord, it does not look good. Last, we have Perfectix from Twisted Minds using a native 1920 by 1080 res with a 95 FOV, with his brightness maxed out. For his graphics settings, he has everything set to very low except for textures, which are on ultra, which really saves the visuals on screen. Even though the anti-aliasing was set to very low, in-game assets came in smooth and fairly defined. If anything, after looking at several pro players' in-game graphics settings, it made me realize that the only two settings that are really worth changing here are anti-aliasing and textures, since those both have the biggest impact on how good player models look. Every other setting isn't as important, and in most cases they should be set to very low. This way you're prioritizing frame rate over visual fidelity, but again, this is purely preference. As you can tell, some pro players are perfectly okay with looking at really low resolution textures just to get a competitive edge, so it's all about that trade-off. Now for my own personal settings, I use the 1728 by 1080 stretch resolution. Even though I'm using a 1440p monitor, I use 1720 by 1080 purely just to try and squeeze as many frames out of the game as I can. Now I also play with a 90 FOV, sometimes 85 if I'm feeling frisky. The reason being is that I feel like a lot of PC players, they see an FOV slider and they instinctively want to max their FOV out as much as they can so they get to see as much of their peripheral view as possible. But as you're widening your FOV, you're actually making players and anything in front of you slightly smaller. And because I'm old and I have bad eyes, I can't afford that, man. So 90 is the sweet spot for me. I feel like if I go anything higher than that, things tend to get a little too small on screen. Now, as far as my in-game graphics settings, I tend to turn everything down as well, with the only two settings that I cannot budge on are anti-aliasing and textures, which I set both of those to medium with sharpen enabled. With the combination of using a lower stretch resolution, but then also bumping up the anti-aliasing and textures and sharpen, it makes the character models and even buildings kind of pop a little bit more. And I feel it's like the perfect balance between, you know, lower resolution, getting more frame rate, but then also maintaining some of that visual quality. I don't know. It looks good to me. So let me know what you guys think. And that's going to do it for this video settings guide. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully it was insightful for you as it was for me, and you learned a couple things along the way. If you found it helpful, just, you know, hey man, feel free to sub, like, share with your friends. If you'd like to support the channel even more, go ahead and check out the membership page, which I'll have linked below in the description. I would tell you to use my creator code dweebh, but honestly, like, don't spend money on this game. It's they don't deserve it. But, you know, as always, I appreciate your guys' support. Hope you had a wonderful holiday, and I hope you're having a good new year so far, and I got a lot of stuff planned for this year, so I look forward to it. I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay safe. Peace.